What I really appreciate about Andor is that it shows that the people involved in the movement, they're not all a Luthen or a Mon Mothma. When you meet the people doing the bank heist, like, it's very clear that this is just like a hodgepodge group of people who are just regular, normal, everyday people who just decided to step in and get to work. They do not have it all figured out. They're not running a perfectly well-oiled machine, but they are all just people that said, you know what, enough is enough, and like, I'm just getting in here and I'm doing something. You don't have to be like a skillful strategist to be able to just like be involved. It is very much a get in where you fit in type of situation. Crazy Stupid Podcast.
Thank you so much for tuning in. If this is your first time watching, we'd love it if you could hit the like button, the subscribe button, and the bell so that you are aware of when we post things.
Hi everybody, welcome back to another episode of Crazy Stupid Podcast. My name is Esther.
And I'm Adrian.
And today we are here to talk about Andor season 1, episodes 1 through 4.
I can't tell you how many times I've watched this first season. I'm not gonna lie. Just in the first scene alone, you could tell, the tone in this show is going to be completely different than anything we'd ever gotten in Star Wars.
I do remember on the first watch, I was like,
what is this?
Different Star Wars fans feel differently about the tone of this series, and I understand. I get it, because if you're into Star Wars for Star Wars, then this is a huge shift. Me personally, this is much more up my alley.
I think what made Andor so refreshing is where they picked up the story in Star Wars.
Yeah.
And I think part of it is due to there being zero misinterpretation of what institution Star Wars has been always trying to critique. Like, listen, this is what it looks like. These are the people who the Empire has been hurting. If you watch Andor, there should be zero confusion with who the allegory is critiquing, who the allegory is supposed to represent. I feel like it was intentional, specifically for Star Wars fans, because it's just been a little... I don't know. I keep seeing shit of like Star Wars isn't political or your Star Wars isn't woke, which is like, guys...
The enemy is an empire.
Literal space Nazis. I don't know, guys.
I think that the scale of Star Wars is really big.
Yes.
Because it's a galaxy.
Mm-hmm.
When you're dropped in the originals, I remember I recently, in recent years, watched like episode 4 again for the first time in a long time. And I was like... this is an insane way to like start this, like to like start something new from scratch that had never been seen before, because without any context of the prequels or anything, they just drop you into a war in a completely foreign place with completely foreign everything. And so picking up on the politics of it, I think, is a lot more difficult because you don't really have a good grasp on like the culture of where you are. You don't have a baseline of what normal is. And so it's hard for you to understand the oppressive nature of the Empire because you're dropped into a world where it already is there.
Yeah.
And you don't experience that world without it. Andor is very helpful in that you don't see the world necessarily without the Empire, but you do see the real day-to-day oppressive nature of the Empire on regular everyday people, and the world feels more familiar, so you can draw parallels that help you better understand the allegory of how this is playing out.
Yeah, and it's also showing how important Ferrix is to helping you understand the allegory of Star Wars, because they spend a lot of time in building up the importance of that town, the culture, the values, the relationships. Those groups of people are the ones that get impacted the most.
Okay, I obviously still love Andor. I love Cassian. I am realizing now he's a very morally great character.
1000%.
When he unalived that officer in the first episode, like, I get it. But like, it was in fact morally wrong.
Well, even in Rogue One, the first time we see him, the way he takes out the informant also was kind of like, there were other options maybe you could have considered.
The officers started it. The officers were harassing him. The officers were corrupt. Did they deserve to die?
I don't know.
Probably not. He did that sheerly out of his own self-preservation. He's a very morally gray character, and that doesn't just show up there. As I'm watching those first couple episodes, extremely one-track minded, extremely impulsive, and a little selfish.
I think they kind of did a lot in building out the lore and history of not just Andor, but like the people who have just been like fighting back against the Empire in general. Like when the bank heist starts and Andor moves into the camp with everybody else, him and Skeen are kind of going back and forth, and they start talking about like some of the tattoos and symbols and how like Andor recognizes this one and how Skeen recognizes some of the things that Andor owns. I think that nihilistic view that we're probably picking up from Andor is that they're kind of telling us there have been some other forms of resistance that have been kind of happening throughout this Star Wars history. We know that like Saul Guerrera has been doing things. There were these other versions of rebellions happening and they just all kind of failed. And so seeing that now Andor has resulted in this, like, I'm just here to self-preserve myself, that makes sense. Because he's like, I've been at the front lines. I've been recruited in as a kid, mind you. So when he's kind of like, yeah, I'm just here to save my own skin. I don't like where he's landed, but I understand how he could get to that point, because it's been, I think they named like 2 or 3 different rebellions that have sort of happened and they never worked out.
I also think this is just a thing with him though, personally. Even when you see his childhood, everybody else went and carried homegirl back to camp, and he very impulsively was like, no, I'm going in there. For what? We don't really know. He just starts breaking stuff when he goes in. I think it's a combination. I think that he as a person has a very impulsive nature about him, where he does things on a whim just without really thinking them through. And then I think that has been compounded by all of his life experiences and all the things that he has lost to make him a very like self-focused person on his own self-preservation, like what you were saying with all of the things that he's been involved in and things that he has seen. I understand it too. The thing that I do take issue with is he doesn't think about people who think a lot about him. Like there are people in Ferrix who care deeply about him, and I think he cares about them too. But when he gets in this stressful situation, he doesn't think about any of them really at all. I know that he leaves some funds for Marva, which like that's good and that's a nice thing to do. But it doesn't seem like he gives any thought to the impact that his decision had on Ferrix, and then the lasting impact of him running away and leaving. And he's brought this invading force to his planet. You even see, when he's having that conversation with Bix, and Bix put her, I don't know if she put herself on the line, but she's taking some kind of risk to arrange this whole meetup between him and Luthen. And he says to her, like, I won't forget this. But he leaves, and Bix pays for what she did for him. He doesn't know the extent, obviously. And like, it's not completely his fault, but she took a risk for you. She got herself involved in this situation, and you dipped. They're left there kind of paying the consequences for that. And he doesn't seem to look back either. He's kind of just like, I'm on the move, I'm on the go, whatever's coming next was coming next. And obviously he's in like very high stakes situations that don't allow for a lot of like retrospection and regret, and I understand that. I also think though that there's evidence that like it's just kind of a part of who he is at his core.
Well, I think we see the different story arcs that he goes through take him on this journey of changing from self-preservation to what we get in Rogue One, where he is fully committed to the cause. One thing that I did want to say that I found interesting my second time was when we were getting the flashbacks of Andor and his childhood, and they were not giving us subtitles. I found that interesting, but I also do wonder like the intentionality behind that, if that was somehow supposed to kind of come across as like this is like a lost culture due to what the Empire did. As Marva says when she's trying to take Andor, once they realize that an Imperial officer was killed, the Empire's going to come in and wipe them all out. I like that little detail of like, we can't translate what their language is because like it's just kind of lost in history now because of what the Empire did to that town. It's another example of what the Empire has taken away, very similar to what they did with Ferrix.
I think they're also mirroring those two moments because two very similar things are happening. Now, in one, he has a lot more agency and choice than in the other, but in both of those scenarios, he is in some way leaving or fleeing a dangerous situation that other people are being forced to sit and stay in. And he's essentially leaving them behind. I think that there's questions that could be asked about Marva's decision.
Well, last time when we watched, you picked up on what you felt was like some very white saviorist vibes.
The white saviorism is like not giving him the choice.
Yeah.
She drugged him. His dad, that's his dad, right? His, like, adopted dad, even kind of says in the moment, like, he has people here.
Yeah.
Like, there are people here. It's the saviorism is like, it's in the act of like taking him without his choice. And I understand language barriers and all. There's a whole, I'm not saying she's a terrible person.
No, yeah.
Okay. But the saviorism is in that, but it's also in like, you are deciding that he lives and no one else does. It's like you making the decision of who survives the situation and who does not, because like you're in a relative position of power and privilege in comparison to them.
Yeah.
In the end, I'm sure that for all the complex feelings he probably feels about it, because there's obviously something there because he's looking for his sister. I'm sure that on the whole, he is grateful to her because he is alive and she has cared for him and she has raised him, and like on the whole, he is like, he's here and he's glad to be there. But yeah, I definitely think there's still some ethical questions that you could ask about her decision in that moment.
Yeah.
The other thing that I was thinking about, this gets more into the fourth episode now. You know, there's all these conversations about like, who do you allow into the movement? As you're trying to build something like a growing movement to take on something extremely powerful. And you really see that same dynamic at play with Andor and the rest of the team that's pulling off the heist. I mean, he really isn't in alignment. He's not in alignment with the ideals that they have. He's there for the money.
Yeah.
And there's a huge risk to that. And while the other members of the team do not know, they're definitely suspicious. But Vel does know. She knows this for a fact. And you can kind of see to Luthen, he's taking on the mindset of like, it's all strategy. It's like we do whatever it takes and we take whatever risks necessary and we use whoever we can use to get where we're trying to go.
Yeah.
You can kind of see like that's not necessarily where everybody else on the team lines up. A lot of the other people on the team, they care a lot about the ideals of this person. They want to know, like, can I actually trust this person? And I feel like we have seen that very recently. We've seen that with the conversations around, what about these like center right Republicans who are, you know, they don't like Trump. We don't agree with them on all things, but we have this one thing in common. Is it worth it to utilize them and to partner with them? Is it risky? Can we trust them? You just kind of see that same ideological like back and forth and that tension in the show. And I appreciate them exploring that.
Well, I also think one of the things that I love about Andor in particular is that you are always meant to root for the resistance, but they make it clear that in terms of ends justifying the means, it is very clear who is right and who is wrong. But the resistance had to do some very questionable things throughout this entire process. I mean, things that we learned even in The Last Jedi, it sort of implied that like they're making deals with arms dealers, right? If we were to take a look throughout history, like you pick any resistance movement, it's not all virtuous.
It's messy work.
Yes. My frustration when it comes to conversations about any form of resistance movements is that it becomes for those that are trying to like uphold the current institution, but claim to have a self-awareness about these movements, is that it becomes a purity test.
Yeah.
When your back is up against the wall in terms of fighting for your rights and for your freedoms, you don't always have the greatest options and choices. Luthen kind of says it where it's like, we would have lost this bank heist. I was on the verge of like pulling the plug and like canceling the mission. We needed to pull in another person. They had always known that they were
a man short.
Yes. And so bringing in Andor, regardless of what his motives are, helps the overall plan. And I think showing that and saying it will not always be clear cut, it will not always be as black and white, but understanding what they're fighting for sometimes has to matter a little bit more, or it has to be factored in your equation more than just sitting back and saying, you're claiming that you're fighting for this, but you're also doing this. It's just not that simple. And I think people try to oversimplify these movements.
Yeah, you can't wait for all the perfect pieces to fall into place. That's not the way it works. Yeah. It doesn't happen. What I really appreciate about Andor is that it shows that the people involved in the movement, like, they're not all a Luthen or Mon Mothma, right? When you meet the people doing the bank heist, like, it's very clear that this is just like a hodgepodge group of people who are just regular, normal, everyday people who just decided to step in and get to work. And they do not have it all figured out. And they're not running a perfectly well-oiled machine. There is lots of disagreement. There is a lot going on. But they are all just people that said, you know what? Enough is enough. And like, I'm just getting in here and I'm doing something. I think that is a mindset that a lot of us need to have right now. What I've kind of started to realize in the last couple of weeks is like, you don't have to be like a skillful strategist to be able to just like be involved. It is very much a get in where you fit in type of situation. And once you're in these groups and you're talking to people and you're going to these events, you kind of realize like even the people that are like in charge locally are just people who kind of just, they got in where they fit in. They just started doing what they could do. And it's like a necessary mentality right now because like the urgency, like we need people to be urgent in their action and their involvement. And what's stopping a lot of people, I think, is this idea that like you have to be this, I don't know, this amazing public speaker or this like, complete genius, or you have to have like all these like extreme skill sets. Like you got to be the next Angela Davis. And like, that's just not it. Like It's just regular everyday people finding a way that they can do something.
Two things what you're saying that I really loved. One, bringing up characters like Luthen and Mon Mothma, I love. The reality is the Resistance would not have won with just Luke or Leia. I think having a character like Luke is necessary because we need a moral compass, right? To sort of share like good versus evil, and that's necessary. But even with the defeat of Vader and Palpatine, the story of Star Wars tells us that like things didn't just go away. There were still things that they had to fight against because that was sort of part of what made Palpatine such a genius is he was trying to build a long-lasting institution. I remember even in some of the comics when Vader is still trying to go on this unaliving spree of trying to take on all of the remaining Jedi that survived Order 66, and Palpatine is getting frustrated with him because he's trying to get him to focus more on the goal, everlasting dominance from the Sith perspective with him and then Vader being his successor. And we see that like there was more fight for them to be a part of. And so what you're saying of like getting in where you're needed, you don't have to be a Jedi.
Right.
You don't have to be just a Luthen. You don't have to just be a Mon Mothma as a senator. And I think that is exemplified with Nemik's character who, listen, man, I know there are a lot of important characters in the Star Wars universe. Nemik, I think, might be at the top of my list. When he realizes that Andor's motives are not aligned with him, he doesn't ostracize him. He keeps him on. And obviously we haven't gotten to the episodes yet, but he doesn't lose faith in Andor's ability to be a cause for good in the rebellion. And then as the story goes on, he gives Andor the manifesto, which they tease him about, where he was like, apparently all he thinks that we need to get liberty is just a few more ideas. But those ideas is exactly what gets Andor in that last scene of the show of season 1 to fully commit to the cause. And because what we were able to get with Andor, we get the events of Rogue One. And without Andor, we probably don't stop the Death Star in the original show. And so all of that stemming down from just him writing that manifesto, he had no idea he was going to have that much impact on this Star Wars history. But all it took was just a few ideas. And I absolutely love his character because what he represents is the idea of like, I think sometimes when it comes to movements, we put value systems on the things that garner the most attention. Public speaking, how many followers you have on social media, how big you were to community organize, or how many likes or views you get on a video that you post. All of those things are necessary. All those things are valid. The same way you need a Jedi, you need people like Luke Skywalker. But the Resistance would not have survived if we didn't have someone like Nemik. I think there's a reason why some of those other movements that Andor alludes to failed. You need more people like that who recognize what their gifts and talents are and recognize that in the grand scale of things, the work that you're doing is still going to matter. And I think, I don't know, every time I see him on the screen, and then I think back to the last bit where he reads some of his manifesto and how it changes the trajectory of Andor's life, and then how Andor changes the trajectory of so many of these other people. Masterful writing. I absolutely love it.
That is such a good point. I think the other thing that really alludes to is, I mean, you kind of talked about, you know, people put a lot of emphasis on like the things that we can quantify really easily. We put a lot of emphasis on like the breadth of how far you can get a message instead of like the intensity of it, I guess. Our generation and generations coming up, we put like so much emphasis on like online activism, posting to your story and sharing this tweet and retweeting and reposting and like, you know, like I see it all the time, and there's nothing wrong with it, but I think we have oversold the impact of that. People so often do that instead of understanding the importance of something like what Nemik is doing, which is like, what is your locus of control in like your real life? Who are the people in your real life that you can actually reach? There is a high likelihood that you have like 5 to 10 people in your life that you could probably convince to do the same.
Yeah.
We don't always put the emphasis on things like that because they're not as flashy and they're not as shiny and like not as many people see them, but they're probably way more impactful.
Yes. The other thing that I really liked, just kind of stay on Nemik. Nemik has this quote where he says, "The pace of repression outstrips our ability to understand it. And that is the real trick of the imperial thought machine. It's easier to hide behind 40 atrocities than a single incident." Friends, we are seeing our current administration do the exact playbook to what Nemik is describing here in Andor. They are flooding the zone with constant atrocities, one after the other, whether it's public education, immigration, going after DEI, defunding institutions that are primarily there to protect the most marginalized groups, feeding into the oligarchy machine. All of that is exactly what Nemik is describing. And I think the reason why he's my favorite character in Andor is his optimism. When all of this is just overwhelmingly happening all the time, you just want to check out. You want to go down the route of nihilism, or you want to go down the route of self-preservation. What he's saying is we have to keep trying. And I think that optimism is why he was so beloved in that group, in that bank heist, is because he's their moral compass. He is what keeps them grounded in the fact that they all have different motives. They see him as still as like an immature child, but they still recognize that like we might have lost our way if we didn't have someone like this reminding us that this is a playbook. It's temporary, it's non-sustainable, and there's still more of us than there is of them. And I just always love that.
Man, the writers were really...
Boy, they
were in their bag with that.
They was cooking.
Also, wow, they wrote this years and years and years before the moment that we're in today.
Because, I mean, the playbook is the playbook.
Yeah, no,
you know?
Yes. I remember that quote hit when I first watched the show, but it still was a little bit more abstract than it is right now. When you read it just now, I was like, oh, yeah.
Yeah.
I think the other thing that his character points to is part of the reason why I think he's able to maintain his optimism. And also, I think why the other people on the team, maybe optimism is not the right word, but like why they're still driven and not checked out is because they have a playbook of their own.
Yeah.
The assumption that a lot of us have is like when it feels overwhelming, then like checking out is like, I'm taking it off my mind. But you can't take it off your mind. Like it's kind of inescapable. Okay. It's following us everywhere. And so this idea that like you can kind of check out to feel some sort of relief is like not true. It does not work. The real relief is knowing that you have a game plan, knowing that you have a way to combat this that is real. I went to like this teach-in, but I learned what we are trying to do right now has been done before in very similar instances, both a long time ago and in very recent history. American exceptionalism is a thing that like exists across the spectrum of politics. I saw somebody point this out recently on TikTok, but essentially like people have a tendency on the right, obviously, to believe that like America is better than like everybody else on the planet. But people on the left also have a form of American exceptionalism, which is that we believe that America is the worst think that it's ever like that it is worse than other nations, and that what is happening to us is exceptional and has not happened to other people, and thus we feel helpless because it's foreign to us what's happening, because we are growing up in this idea of like America as a place of freedom. But like, it's important to remember, like, what we are going through right now is a thing that other people have gone through and have overcome and have won, and there is a playbook. There is like a very clear set of steps that these movements go through in order to eventually overcome very oppressive and fascist forms of government. And that knowledge, for me, like, it like literally unlocked something for me. And then I was like, and I know what I need to do. Like, and now I know how I can like step in and be involved in this.
Overall, great first 4 episodes. Really love the direction that they took. Man, I'm very excited about this new season. I'm going to be sad that it's gone though. Because I'm going to be real, once Andor is done, I don't think there's anything left in Star Wars that is exciting me.
The mother shows just don't hit.
They don't. I'm sorry. Listen, all the animated shows I think are good. They're fun. But it felt like Andor feels like the last show where there was a reason to tell this story. Some of the other things that are coming out of Lucasfilm right now feel like a microcosm of what's happening in Hollywood. You're putting it out there for the sake of just making content. It feels unoriginal. Like, I thought Ahsoka was good, but it did just kind of feel like a sequel to Rebels.
Child, I forgot that show.
Yeah, they're coming out with the Grogu and Mandalorian story, and I was like, the excitement isn't there. Acolyte had promise. I loved it there, but there were still some flaws there, which is why the appeal wasn't where it needed to be. Andor right now feels like the only thing that is keeping me afloat in my love for Star Wars right now, and that is sad. The buzz, at least in my opinion, around Mandalorian after season 2 hasn't been there, in my opinion. So I don't know.
I feel like Hollywood is in like an experiment right now that like I hope that they wrap up soon, because I think we've had the results. But I feel like we're kind of seeing like the longevity of these really big IPs like this, because a lot of what's happening is like you beating a dead horse. Like you really like, you're like, and we can get one more out of this. We can get one more movie, one more TV series. We can squeeze something out. And it's like, I don't know, like Hollywood has not done anything like this before, where for like such an extended period of time without breaks, we have continuously just like squeezed all of the creative juice out of like one singular IP. Like that's kind of new. There are characters that withstand decades, like James Bond and Superman and those kinds of things, but there is normally like not huge, but periods of time where like they stop.
Yeah.
And then they started again fresh. This is like the first time with like Marvel and Star Wars and stuff that we've seen, and Lord of the Rings now and Game of Thrones and all the things, where now what we're starting to see is like, you don't stop. Like once one thing ends, you're like, what else can we pull out of this, one universe that we've created? And I think that's also how we ended up with all these live action remakes.
Yeah.
I think it's all the same. I think the mentality right now is like, we've got this IP, like, okay, let's do something with it. What can we do with it? And I think that like we should let this experiment end now, because I think we have the results that by and large, it's disappointing.
Yeah.
You'll get a hit every once in a while, but a lot of the things that you do in the middle will feel a little meh, which is why instead of trying to constantly pull something out of this like one universe, maybe let's use them a little bit more sparingly, a little bit more carefully when you really have something to say, like Andor. I don't know.
Anyways, thank you all for indulging our little final rant before we end this episode. We would love to hear what you all think. We're very excited to start these conversations with you all with Andor. There's also Last of Us coming. We're excited for that as well. But as always, let us know what you all thought about Andor season 1. Let us know in the comments below. We'll be back next week to talk about episodes 5 through 8. Yes. We're doing 4 at a time. So hopefully we'll see you all there. And with that, we will see you all next time. Take care, everyone. Peace.